Okay, welcome to Legally Everywhere, where we are what? We are legally everywhere, looking into everything. Wait one moment while I modify my screen. Let's see what's happening here. There we go. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay. Just want to make sure that I can see. This is my first time going live, and I just want to make sure that you guys are seeing everything the way that it needs to be seen, and it doesn't appear that you are. Let's see if we can pause the live. Okay, let's see if I can just get a visual for how it looks on your end. This is my first time going live on the page. I'm so excited. So let's see if I can see how it looks. I'm hoping that you all can see my slide. Okay, beautiful. Okay. So, welcome to Legally Everywhere, where we are looking at what? We are looking into everything. I appreciate your patience as I navigate this new technical space that we are venturing into. I wanted to make sure that I put on a live for you all. I wanted to say thank you all for following and being a part of this virtual space here. I want to thank you for following along as we kind of really walk through like civic literacy. I am so excited to share this project with you all. But just a little bit of foundational information. I wanted to say that this particular page, I want people to think of this Legally Everywhere page as a buffet. So there will be times where you get information through the shorts, and that's kind of like an appetizer or a sampler when you kind of go to a buffet. Think of it that way. But truly the page is really more like a buffet structure. I read all the comments. I do my best to read all the comments and make sure that if there's any like very helpful feedback in how I can present certain information, that I do try to incorporate that in so that I meet all accessibility needs that I'm able to. Like if it's within my bandwidth and capacity, I will always do my best to try to accommodate. So as long as it's like constructive, helpful feedback or like suggestions, recommendations, questions, I'm going to always try to do what I can to answer those kind of things in the live form. But to truly think of the page as like a buffet, if I had to give like an analogy, so to speak. So your live would be like your main entree, like that main course. I would say some of the videos I'll put up, those will kind of be like sides. I mean, you still gonna get what you kind of want, but I feel like the actual lives will probably be what feels more like your entree, because I'm able to sit and make full connections to all of the pieces that I might give. So everybody's not gonna pretty much grab the same plate. You know, we go to buffet, one person get one thing, the next person get another thing. It's totally fine. Some people are gonna just want samples. They just kind of want a little small thing. They just wanted something to fill them up at that moment. But whatever wherever placement you're at in that conversation is totally fine. I'm very excited that we're open and interested in the content that I present, maybe my delivery in my content, or maybe just my viewpoint and how I see things and the connections I tend to make. So as we venture off in this journey of kind of looking at things, I really just want to say thank you. I did not anticipate that I would get as much feedback as I have gotten thus far. I had no idea that I would get subscribers so soon or get so many views to my page. So I am overwhelmed with excitement as we work on this particular project, which I dedicated this whole YouTube page to. So once again, it's called Legally Everywhere because we're looking into everything. There are going to be some elements that will be comparative law because I am an international law student. There will be elements that are somewhat U.S.-centric. So for people who may be viewing that are from places that are not the United States, know that I'll be diving into things that are going on here in the United States because I am a U.S. native. And, you know, I think it's really important if you're going to do a comparison that you actually have some foundation on what you're comparing. So there will be elements where I'm kind of talking about civil law jurisdictions. There'll be times that I talk about common law. But right now I'm kind of focused in more so on the United States, like government structure, and looking at certain like doctrines and kind of understanding. So before I can have the conversation of, hey, do other countries do this? How do they do it? How do they carry it out? Are they allowed or are they not allowed? We have to kind of understand, what do we do here? How do we carry it out? What connections can be made between different doctrines and different paperwork, like explain the foundations. So that's kind of where some of this has come. Initially, it kind of started on TikTok, and then it just kind of somewhat has grown. So you will see that some of the videos, there are some comments where I responded to things. I thought that might be something that this community might benefit from. So I shared some of those things so you can get a little bit of flavor and taste for the kind of content that I would like to present here. So thus far, we have done on this page 7 receipts that kind of lead into a specific lens of understanding, right? I will talk about some of those pieces a little bit in this live, but for the most part, I just want to kind of focus in on some of the regulatory things because that's been in recent news. And ironically, it was things I was kind of discussing on another platform, but I have uploaded some of those videos here. So once again, you have those as receipts, you have those as shorts, and I will once again expand and explain some of that. So this is the very first live. So once again, I ask for a little grace because I wanted to work on some of the technology elements so that when I get on, I can give you guys all of the information in a really comforting and calm manner, but also pretty straight and direct. So I wanted to make sure I could navigate any technical issues this first time around. So once again, I do appreciate any grace that you extend as you kind of have to deal with some of those initial kinks, right? With that being said, because we do cover like policy, doctrines, at some point we'll kind of look at some of the executive orders and we'll look at them from different administrations. So don't think we'll just look at one administration. My goal is to go back a few. My ideal goal is to probably date it back at least to the 90s because I think that we can be able to track patterns a little bit better, but you do have to have starting points. So right now I'm going with current day, current events, and moving somewhat backwards between laws and doctrines so that we can kind of fully understand what is going on. Most people have a mindset of how does this affect my life? You know what I mean? Like, how does this affect me? Why do I care? Why should I care? So what will happen as we move through the PowerPoint presentation that I did set up for you all today is I'm going to look at current events, and then I'm asking the question, how did this even happen? Like, how could this even happen? And today's focus is regulatory bodies. More specifically, there has been a lot of news around Thanksgiving, which just passed for those who are celebrating. And we had a couple of incidents where we had some regulatory things that seemed to not be going properly. And it seemed to be kind of odd, right? We had beets that were in green bean cans. We had water that was inside of cranberry sauce cans. And I will certainly provide you with some receipts and evidence as we move forward. Additionally, there was Campbell's soup that was a similar incident that goes all the way back to like November 22nd. So we're literally talking about a pretty finite amount of time that the 3 separate types of incidents occurred. 3 different major, food companies, right? Canned food specifically, right? So they're all within the same type of industry, all within the same type of world. And it's very interesting that all of them, every single one of the 3 that I am referencing that we will look at, had issues around the same exact time. Because we're talking about the time frame between pretty much November, right? Let's just isolate for those 30 days, right? But honestly, if we're thinking about when the incidents actually occurred, we're talking about November 22nd to Thanksgiving, day, right? That's a very localized, specific amount of time. We have to kind of ask the question, how does that happen? If it was just one company and it was just like one can or a couple cans, right? We say, okay, that was a mishap, that was a fluke, right? But this was multiple incidents that were reported from 3 different well-known, well-respected companies, which suggests it's a pattern. Anytime something happens 3 times, that's when you can start to say it's an established pattern. So we have 3 separate agencies around the same exact time having similar types of issues relevant to mislabeling, mispackaging, and labeling, issues, right? So that's a pattern. So that's something we can kind of reverse. I like to use the word reverse engineer. It's not exactly reverse engineering, but it's as far as the thought process, we take that and we move backwards. So we know that this is something related to regulatory, right? So we're looking at regulatory things that are happening, and we know that it's systemic, right? So then we get to trying to track what all is happening. So you're like, okay, lady, give me the receipts. I love to lay foundation because I did hear when I read the comments that people were looking for a little bit more foundation without me just jumping. So I wanted to be as thorough as I possibly could here. One moment, take a quick sip of my tea here. So once again, that just gave you the overall about the buffet. Different people come from different things. There will be videos that I'm focused on the regulatory bodies and agencies and how that connects maybe to the Project 25 manual. There will be times where I look at it from a different lens, like the Department of Education, from food, from another perspective. This is food and regulatory, but there's another regulatory body like the CFPB, and I had some connections in different videos there. So I will kind of map us to different places, and different people will have different interests, right? So it's not about a right or wrong thing. These are just patterns, things that I have tracked and noted as I was reading and looking through things, and I like to share them with people, and I love to have conversation and dialogue. A lot of times I consider social media whether it be TikTok or some other platform, whether it be YouTube where we are right now. I love the idea of like the free travel that we are able to have, where we can connect in with one another in respectful settings, where you know our thoughts are considered and valued, and we get to learn from one another. I feel like so often we don't get the opportunity to kind of really learn about civic literacy. I think people make assumptions about what other people know. And I think a lot of times because politics, people don't get to have the conversations where they really feel like I can really learn and just talk and just being accepted in a respectable space where you can just talk. So I don't really bring politics into these conversations. What I'm looking to have in these settings is some civic literacy, where we're really just trying to learn and figure some things out and have the question, can it be done? You know, when is it done? Who is kind of driving certain things? And if something seems like it's not supposed to be done, how is the situation being set up to permit a thing that shouldn't happen? You know, so is there discretion involved? Are they using discretion, or are they operating outside of scope? You know, these are questions I think are really profound to ask, and even more interesting and fun when we can try to get some of the answers. So to a degree, it's a very investigative kind of experience that we do here, but we do it in a very welcoming way. I'm very big on community, so if I find that in my comments that there are things that are targeted towards individuals, I will delete those kind of comments. But if you're just asking questions and we're just having even some lively debate, I'm not, you know, in opposition of that. I'm in support of people trying to, you know, get more understanding and seek knowledge. So we can start to venture through the actual presentation that I have prepared. I just once again want to thank you all for allowing me to test out the new setup tonight. Technically we are ventured into the early morning, but it showed me algorithm wise that most people were watching videos around this time, so I wanted to kind of honor your preferences as I kind of start to just roll this out. So I'm gonna go switch to the other screen just to go look really quick to see if there was any comments. I see one viewer and one said welcome, and once again thank you for being on live with me today as I navigate being on YouTube live. This literally is my first time. They allowed me to go live today, literally just today, so I'm excited. I do have a recent news clip I wanted to show you guys, and it's embedded in here, so we will be moving through that pretty shortly. Just once again, another quick note, this is a buffet style. If you missed the beginning, this is buffet style channel, right? Meaning I'm going to lay out the food, the patterns, and the receipts so you can walk through at your own pace later, or you can kind of, you know, snack a little bit now, peruse through some of the receipts that I might have through shorts, look through the videos, you know, get your little side pieces, watch some of the lives that I will try to put together, which will probably be, you know, somewhere between like 30 minutes. Sometimes I might have an hour. I try to make it really digestible. But know that wherever your interests fall, I'm hoping that my content will be appealing to you and kind of answer some of the questions that you may have, or just meet some of your desires and needs. That is my intention. And this is additionally, like I've mentioned before, it's an educational commentary. It's not legal or medical advice by any means. I just walk through public information, news clips, consumer experiences to help people connect dots. I'm really big on like connecting and looking for patterns. I think it helps us be able to make decisions. A lot of times people are very uncomfortable because they don't know what's going on. They didn't see it coming. And I think that's a big part of coping with certain situations. It's really hard to strategize and come up with your course of action of how you want to address something that you're dealing with when you really didn't see it coming. I think that's a big part of coping. And sometimes there can be like a slight grief related experience I feel like people can sometimes have when they're walking into stuff and it's like, hey, this is not maybe what I thought this meant when I voted for this, or maybe this isn't what I thought it was when, you know, certain things were discussed. I had a different interpretation of it, or I just didn't know that that was a resource that was out there, or I could have been more informed. I maybe would have done things differently. I just want people to feel informed, so that's why I wanted to offer some civic literacy opportunities in the community, because I feel like we really just don't have enough of that. In the current day and age, we have a lot of like flash information, like sometimes like scary title, like, let's say titles that clickbait type of things, and you're like, oh my goodness, what's happening? But then we don't actually get the education behind the piece. We just get this like fear response, but we don't get the information that would make us feel comfortable to say, I want to move this direction, or I want to move in that direction. So my hope, once again, is just that I can offer some educational commentary, and that I can help you connect dots, so whatever decisions you have to make when you're engaging in your civic duty, which I believe everyone should do to the best of their ability, just, you know, vote if you're able. Whatever decisions that you may make, that you will walk into that and you will feel informed. So, once again, the buffet and the Project 25, which is just one of the current focuses. I'll have many things that I will peruse through on this channel, but Project 25 is my way of, like, through the lens of this buffet, is my way of mapping out who is making decisions about our everyday life, and from what's on the dinner table to what's in the makeup bag, right? Because we have federal regulations for makeup, and they're lifting some of those, to my understanding, to allow, I want us to say that they're allowing asbestos, but they're changing some things related to how they're regulating asbestos, after we had 10 years of them sitting with commercials telling us that it was horrible. So that's an element that we'll discuss. Who's regulating your bank account and, you know, your workplace, right? All these are different things that sit in the buffet that we will potentially snack on. We will eat, or, you know, chew on these thoughts. And so think of it like, today, for instance, we're talking like what's in my pantry, right? We'll discuss like the Ocean Spray cranberry cans and the Campbell's soup, like what's in my pantry. Most people have these kind of items in their pantry. But another video, we're going to talk about like watchdogs and what have you. So keep in mind, always kind of spin back and see what we have going on, because I'll be making lots of connections to different things. So that brings us to, hopefully you can see that my slide has changed. That brings us to essentially like what I described as phase 2 of my patterns moving through theory to reality. And that's the biggest thing I was saying. A lot of times the question becomes, what is actually going on, and how does it affect me? That's the main question. Like, you don't even care about their theories and other stuff until you can kind of think like, how does any of this affect me? So viral reports showing multiple major brands having major quality control failures. We specifically talked about like Ocean Spray, Del Monte, and Campbell's, 3 very known, very respected companies, right? And as I've said before, these are not one-offs. This is systemic. Regulatory oversight, all of that. So we're going to jump right on in. I just wanted to make sure I look and I can see what's going on on live. So as I'm trying to toggle back and forth between what I think you all can see. So essentially, like, it seems like there are 3 separate situations, but really from where I'm sitting, they're actually pretty much the same thing. They're all managed in, like, as far as regulatory bodies, the oversight comes from the same regulatory bodies. And also I wanted to keep in mind, We had a shutdown for 43 days. And a lot of times during that time, those regulatory bodies don't have that same forceful oversight because the system is shut down, right? So when that government shut down, we got to think those particular cans and food that they probably had going through production, that's not what's sitting on the shelves, because that just happened. That just slowed down. So this was something that was already in the works and already a problem for 3 separate companies to have issues around the same exact time. 2 in particular had issues with mislabeling, specifically what came out of the can. The other one was what the executive said about what was in the can. So that's what we're going to start to move over to the next slide. So the very first one was from a Campbell executive. And there was leaked audio from an employee. This was the VP of technology. And he alleged there was 3D printing on the Campbell soup, right? He said it was 3D printing. Now, when you go look at the can, which I'm going to show you a picture of pretty soon, it says it does acknowledge bioengineered, right? Relevant to corn and soy, right? So that's specific to crops. That is not saying that there's 3D printed meat, in the food. And there was another exec, like the CEO, who when they finally did decide to respond, which was later, then I believe seemed reasonable for them to respond. They said, basically like, yeah, no, we don't do that. But they didn't produce any like documentation or paperwork, right? When the person who works over technology says abnormal technical things are happening to the food and they don't know that they're being recorded, and they saying, I wouldn't feed that to my family. I stopped eating that stuff a long time ago. That's for poor people, which was, what their response was. And you can look at the article. I put a screenshot there. The article came out on the 22nd. I reported on it on the 23rd and been following it pretty consistently. That says something, right? That says something. I want you also to keep in mind the reference he made, that it was for the poor people, because we'll have another comment that we'll actually be able to hear that I pulled from TikTok momentarily. So keep that in the back of your mind, right? Bioengineered was already on the food. I wasn't someone who was even looking at the cans, so I went to go grab some cans to go see it, and sure enough, the cans themselves do say bioengineered for crops. But when it comes to the meat element, then it says meat on every single one of the soups that I could find, right? And I even went to the Campbell's Chunky and got that can, and it also described or displayed meat. You go in the ingredient section, it said meat. You look on the image, it says meat. It has a picture of it. It says it consistently: chicken meat, sirloin, burger, country, vegetable meat, right? So that's a mislabeling, a misrepresentation if you're saying it's bioengineered where it's not actual animal product. You know what I'm saying? That's a problem. So like what the label actually says, right? Just covered that. Product says this. I'm showing you the labels from the ones I was able to get in person in hand. This is what it said. It said chicken meat, chicken stock, sirloin beef, modified food starch, contains bioengineered ingredients, but that was relevant to corn and soy. No disclosure of 3D printed meat or restructured meat, right? So then we move over to like the FDA labeling rules, because there's oversight, right? And it says that if meat is printed, fabricated, cultured, formed, restructured, synthetic, right? If meat is, labels must use terms like a restructured chicken product, cultured chicken, formed chicken pieces, meat, like they have to specify like the process that the meat went through. Like these are things they have to specify, right? The fact that the company response was like, yeah, we just kind of don't do that. In my mind, I was like, the more I kept thinking about it, I said, man, they have to have regulatory people in place. So it's not even just like what FDA who's overseeing, like they have their own special documents they have to go through. But I started thinking like we all have had a job where at least probably once in our life where, and usually most places of employment where you have to physically be on site, where you have to go through an OSHA training. And I'm like, if you are in a building and there's any kind of chemicals in there, there's usually a book, right, that you have to have access to and know where it is. OSHA is a very long training that they make us all go through, and you know that there's a book that identifies every chemical that's supposed to be in your building. So that would also identify if you have products exposure to things that, let's say, make bioengineered food, that would be reflective somewhere in that book as well, right? It has to be. And that book would need to be maintained in multiple places just per their regulations. These are just basic thoughts without saying I'm a part of that industry, things that you just know would have to be in place, right? We'll keep this in mind. I'll bring another piece up later about regulatory bodies because we want to look at the other story so we can get a full picture, right? So that was Campbell's. This was an Ocean Spray investigates viral video claiming cranberry sauce cans were filled with water, right? There were multiple cases. There were 3 that I was able to locate on TikTok. This is the exact article that came out yesterday. It came out yesterday around 12. Originally, I was going to go live at 3 yesterday, but it was not allowing me to do so, so I am here today. And as you can see, this is an article from yesterday. So it's not an isolated incident, right? If it was just one company, one little situation, like, okay, maybe. This is not isolated. This is multiple major brands showing product integrity failures, right? So Ocean Spray had multiple viral videos of cans filled with water around Thanksgiving. Multiple. It wasn't, and one person had 3 cans with water. So that's what's imaged here. I'm going to circle it on the screen. That's what this can is. I'll show you the actual live video of them opening the can. This is another can, Devontae, which is supposed to be green beans. And you can clearly see that there's a red residue that's coming out of it from the beet pigmentation. And then you can actually see that that looks like cans of beets. Just based off of like the color and the texture there. Meanwhile, the cans that are supposed to have cranberries, which you would expect to have maybe a similar kind of color residue structure, they have no color. If there were any byproducts of cranberry, there would be some level of stain or color, which we'll see better when we go to the other image. But there is no color, there is no stain that would suggest there's any byproduct of cranberries. If anyone has ever had cranberries, had to mash them up, there's like a slight reddish undertone and color that would be present. So that suggests there was not even cranberry water. Because some people are saying, oh, I ordered cranberry sauce and got cranberry water. I would fair to say that that's not even cranberry water, because if it actually had cranberry in it, there would be some level of residue that would be present. That does not appear to be present in the 3 cans that we watched, or that we will watch this lady literally open with a butcher knife, which was certainly an interesting way of opening cans. So, give you all a second just to kind of look at that screen for a second. So as I kind of said before, why the errors should almost be kind of like impossible to occur. There's so much overlap. I feel that happens with multiple bodies, that really the things that we see and experience as a consumer, this shouldn't happen. Like literally, they have requirements with regards to identity of things. There's so many processes and things that happen to how they identify, they mark. Like, let's say for instance, you go for your food. Like for instance, they say, oh, it's bioengineered and it's not meat. Like, there is a way that they literally put the food to get tested, where they're going to be able to say it has a certain amount of fat content, it has a certain amount of, you know, let's say protein breakdown. There should be something that can literally tell you what type of animal, you know, product, byproduct this is. You should be able to have a report that identifies all that very clearly. And to be quite honest, these things sit inside of their companies per regulation. So when the claim came out, the CEO should have been able to say, hey, no, we're going to give you the report that we just had done on X date, you know, so maybe a couple months ago. Or even, often the public, we're not picky. Even if it was a report from a year ago, we wouldn't have tricked, you know. It's just the fact that you didn't produce anything, you know, it's very disturbing. Because once again, there are so many rules and regulations. They have field standards, batch traceability. Like, you could localize, you could literally say, hey, when did this come out? Based off the numbers and the codes that they put on, they could say, oh, it came out during this batch. Recall all of that. That's not what happened. You know, that's not what happened thus far in either of the two situations where the CEOs made any statement, or I should say the companies made any statement formally, and the third one did not make one to my knowledge. It was just funny to me that they all came out around the holiday batch. So literally, these all kind of probably happened around similar batching time frames, because of the time frame that it took for it to go from the distribution and like, well, from their production to their distribution to getting on the shelves and being where consumers can access them. Given the fact that that process is pretty standard, it's ironic that all the companies were having issues, or all the ones that we're referencing were having issues around this same exact time frame. Specifically relevant to the products coming out of the cans, we have these two particular companies. So that's interesting, right? And then the video I'm going to show you in this next clip is quite literally 3 cans in one household, right? So that lets you know that something's going on. That is a full-blown contamination. It's not a fluke. That's not a one-off. That one bad one just slipped in there. One household had 3 bad cans. And once again, it's an undefined, undeclared, undisclosed fluid, right? It's supposed to be cranberry sauce, which is more like a solid. It's less mobile. It's a little bit more stiff. It has color, texture. This is a fluid liquid. We can't necessarily say it's water because we don't know. It hasn't been tested. But we like to say in the most ideal situation that it be just water, right? These are not brand new companies. Like, these are brands that we have known and been familiar with for decades. One of them is, you know, over 100 years old. So basically saying, oops, is not gonna cut it. So I'm gonna go ahead and play this clip so that you might see what I'm talking about with regards to this can. So essentially, I pulled this clip from TikTok. You can see the original person's information here if you're interested in locating, you know, the source information. I'm really big on providing source information, so you can see that I keep all the sources right here in the document.
Oh, I'm like that. Oh. The fuck is this? What y'all did? That is sold us cans of water as cranberry sauce. We gonna get some focus help. Let him in.
Okay. Yep, as you can see, she cut that open, propped that thing open with a butcher knife, hand and butcher knife. And there was 3 separate cans that you could see there. Additionally, what I found interesting was that the person who was also in the video had asked, you know, where'd you get those cans? Did you get them from Focus Hope? right? So it's just very interesting that relevant to the can utilization, people have it in their minds that it's okay if someone is of lower social economic status for them to have something that is contaminated or not good. So it's another question that we put out there to kind of keep in mind, because when it comes to patterns, we'll see other documentations that kind of reference lower social economic food access later on. So just kind of keep these mental notes and these little receipts. So just off the cuff, it's pretty disturbing, right? You're looking at something that should be sauce. It's clearly water. It's not me making it up. It's not me trying to scare anybody. These are actual video clips. You can see that's the whole entire video. Nothing is edited, cut it off, or anything. Unfortunately, this leads to distrust. I really felt like I could see a connection between the jungle. I don't know if it's still required text in the high schools, but when I was in high school, it was required text. And one thing that I find really interesting is that originally the book was about working conditions, but because the conditions described about things surrounding food, it's the one thing that really kind of took off in the conversation. But it's still a significant piece of the conversation relevant to, you know, what we're experiencing right now. I see it as kind of like a modern day, like, jungle situation. We're talking about food safety, misrepresentation, regulatory compliance, and how it's kind of falling short of the expectations that we as consumers have, and then certainly falling short of what these federal laws and regulators are saying should be the standard. We talked about that corporate response of, well, hey, it was fabricated, you know, we source our stuff traditionally and it's safe and all of that. Where's the reports then? Because that, if it's easy to disprove, then disprove it. We would love for you to do that. Missing documentation problems, right? If claims are false, the company should easily just be able to release that laboratory report, as I was saying earlier. Protein count, fat analysis, animal origin, supplier verification. These are, for them to have a supplier or a consistent place that they're going to source their meat from, there's more than likely a MOU or MOA. So memorandum of understanding, memorandum of agreement, you know, either they have some understanding that they will work together, or they have a specific contract saying we are going to work together. We have this, they're like, we shook on it, like a handshake, professional handshake, right? You could produce those. We have an agreement with this company, right? If y'all work together, that shouldn't be a problem to produce. There should be no problem producing these fat analysis, these lab reports, because you have to have those on file anyway. So literally you're not doing any additional work. And it almost would be like free PR in a positive manner, because you're like, oh, that's absolutely not true, and here's the reports, you know? But that's not what happened. No, that's not what happened at all. As I said before, mandatory documentation exists under the FDA, the USDA, OSHA, FSMA. So there should be reporting that's in documentation that's in place relevant to these 4 bodies when we're talking about these incidents that's happening with all 3 of these companies with these cans, right? They have to talk to all these people. So you have food composition and labeling, meat, poultry, if and inspections, worker exposure laws, material handling data, food safety, from my perspective, right? Even if we didn't look at all the names of all these different things that we know they have to have like records of on hand, like literally from the perspective of a consumer, all we needed was like one. And mind you, I added an extra with the MOUs, the MOAs, and all of that. Like, quite honestly, all we needed was like one. We just need a quick excerpt. We don't need the whole thing. We just needed to know, like, okay, the food that we've been eating for multiple generations, like, are good. right? Because most people were using these things during what? The holidays. Because we trusted these products. And you kind of have to keep in mind, like, what's going on with the regulatory bodies that this stuff is happening all around the same time. Keeping in mind, this is not something we can say, oh, it's because of the 43 days that was shut down. This predates that because they were already in the marketplace, which means that you probably have to watch out for those too, right? So, as I mentioned, there are different logs and things like safety audits, quality control tests, supplier audits, animal product logs, ingredient logs, all this stuff. Any of these, could have worked. The absence of it suggests that there's some type of internal conflict or unreadiness. And honestly, it leads to a whole nother line of thought when it comes to stuff. So it's just, these are some of the kind of connections I want us to kind of try to make. Right? The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. And mind you, that was 1906. This is 2025. Sinclair exposed unsafe work conditions and contaminated food practices. We literally saw situations where there were like green beans in corn containers and like beets and the green beans is the image that I showed. That's a contamination of food practices, right? But that book informed certain health inspection acts and like rules. You know what I'm saying? Like that book informs certain standards relevant to how our food is handled. And it's just so unfortunate that, we're kind of in a modern version of that. It's not exactly the same. It's like we're saying, oh, butcher this and that. It doesn't have to be about improper use or handling of butchered meat when we think we're eating meat and we find out it could be bioengineered. And the best arguments that I have seen online is that if it was 3D printed meat, it'd be way more expensive. I think people are missing the bigger picture here. We already see that it's bioengineered, at least when it comes to the corn elements, corn and soy. We have bigger issues kind of like at hand. So I just like to put some parallels in place. Once again, like worker safety, rights parallels, regulatory gaps cause safety issues for the workers too and the general public when certain things aren't being upheld, right? And just keep in mind also, if you're kind of interested just in the jungle, if you don't recall or remember it, there were also deeper themes about immigrant worker exploitation with little protections, and it also helped inform some things around that. But the biggest reform that happened was relevant to the food directly, but it was like a labor, rights kind of book as well, if you go back and kind of give it a read. So we talk about, like, when I'm saying it's more of the modern day jungle situation, bioengineered crops is not 3D food. Like that's not the same. But the fact that it's kind of getting to a point where people almost didn't even kind of feel as bothered, to the extent I felt like maybe you should have been. They're like, oh, basically the same thing. That was a lot of the comments. I'm like, that's definitely not the same thing. 3D printed requires disclosures under the federal guidelines. And if they in fact did that, they needed to disclose it to us. We had a right to know what was going in our bodies. You don't just get to make that decision for someone, especially in this day and age. Consent is a really big conversation, and companies do not just get to decide, oh, I'm going to not tell you what I'm putting in here and you can have it. And we have a certain demographic that we'll silo a lot of this stuff to and say, hey, we think you fall in a poor category, so we're going to just force you to eat this and not even tell you because you should be happy you're eating. That's 100% unacceptable. 100% unacceptable. It doesn't matter if the person is affluent or someone who is in between. Food regulations are food regulations. They're standardized. It doesn't matter who you are. The food should be proper, or it shouldn't be put out into distribution. That's just the standard. Like, we shouldn't have to question certain things that we're questioning about the food now. So the biggest comparison was like there was a manual labor to like overcrowded factories back then, right? You think about the safety ratio, so to speak. What's fair, appropriate for someone to be handling like at the capacity, right? You think about assembly lines and what have you. And like today, it's a different type of structure, of movement, right? You have automations and tech systems and corporate logistics that potentially could cause harm, right? If they're like, hey, we can cut the cost by, I don't know, using something fake, or we can cut the cost by doing it this way, or we can cut the cost by doing it that way. That causes harm. It's causing harm, not necessarily always helpful. Sometimes things seem helpful, like from a perspective on paper. Sometimes things conceptually do sound good, and then when you put it in practice, it's not that good. And then that's when people should have the discernment and enough ethics to say, hey, we'll modify this, or maybe go back to maybe previous structures until we can find something that's more appropriate for the setting. But that doesn't appear to be what's happening. Yeah. So I was gonna make another pattern connection, but I decided I won't do that. I will try to keep it very consistent with what I've already placed and laid out here. Just kind of think about it this way, like the complexity of it all kind of increased, the transparency didn't. Like they're not telling you like, hey, this is what's going on. They're not doing that. So maybe it's a little bit more involved because now we're talking about, computer automations, and we're talking about tech systems, maybe AI doing something, or corporate logistics saying, hey, just cut it and we'll just figure it out later, or we'll take the financial charge for the regulation violation, right? Because some companies do that. They say, how much does it cost if we get caught? And they're like $10,000. They're like, oh, how much does it cost to fix? $15,000. Okay, we'll just keep doing what you're doing and we'll just pay the violation. Unfortunately, some companies do operate that way logistically, right? Because that number is comfortable enough for them, for the amount of times they can get away with this, and they do it. You have to be honest and realize that people do stuff like that. But that, once again, it's like the integrity and the ethics has to come in, It's very much there if you look at the pattern. It's there. Uncomfortably so. It is there. So, once again, kind of like public relations versus like the real issues. Then it was like fear about the food panic, and now it's more like an information panic, right? We don't know what's going on. Before, it was like they looking at butchered animals and things not being, tended to the correct way, and sometimes diseased animals, rotten stuff, just horrible, disgusting things that you can go read if you want those kind of details. Not something I want to read at night, but to each his own. Whatever your pleasure. The thing that is potentially keeping someone up at night, relevant to these current events, is the lack of information. You don't know what you're eating. You don't know what you're eating. To have that level of a mismatch, it's not. That doesn't even discuss maybe some of the unidentifiable things sometimes that they put in the foods that they don't, because of standards, they don't actually have to put written, right? We're not even talking about those kinds of things. We're not even talking about those kinds of things. We're quite literally talking about the fact that you thought you were getting corn and you ended up with corn and green beans. Or you thought you were getting green beans and you open a can and you have quite literally beets in there. Or you think you're getting cranberries and you get something that could be water or could be something else. It certainly isn't cranberry water, right? There's no residue to support or indicate that it has any derivatives of cranberry in there, not natural cranberry. So the question is, what is that, right? Here, when I talk about public distrust, right, there's the can. You see the person hand opening the can. You see this one. These are the direct quotes and screenshots from TikTok. These were pulled yesterday. And then this was an image showing that I initially started reporting on like the Campbell's and some of these food related issues on that particular platform, November 23rd. Okay. So we've discussed this, but I feel like why this matters, it kind of brings us back to why I even discussed it, right? Those are handled by federal governments, like, right? So our federal regulatory bodies. And there is something that is happening that would put us in a predicament where there are multiple companies and brands that are having issues relevant to labeling, relevant to like the identification of what's in their cans. That is not an isolated issue. That is systemic. That means there's a problem with the whole system and structure because it was multiple companies that was under the jurisdiction of these regional bodies, and this was multiple regional bodies, right? You can't convince me that all of those bodies could make that kind of mistake, that oversight, right? That doesn't seem plausible. And then it happened in multiple cans, right? Multiple companies under the jurisdiction of multiple agencies. That is systemic. You can't say that's a one-off. In the TikTok era, I feel like in the social media era that we live in, you know, we get to see evidence real time. People were literally becoming panicked because their Thanksgiving they felt was ruined because they depended on these companies to do what they had agreed on, right? You pay your money with the intention that whatever you're purchasing is what you believe that you're purchasing, and they were not honored. And especially in a time just following an economic situation where people were absent, several people were absent of food resources, you know, or maybe even like money for those 43 days. And then they have a holiday where they are celebrating and celebratory, usually involving some level of food. And then you find out the food is compromised, regardless if you're like a federal government employee or you were connected to those programs where you were getting government money, or you're someone who is utilizing those temporary needs programs or the nutritional assistance programs, right? All of it that was connected, right? And that's how it shows up in your everyday situation. So I'm going to move to the next one. Well, this is what it looks like. I pulled comments directly from TikTok. Like I said, I like to go to source information. So if we're going to get information on current impact, a lot of times people will tell you right what you need to know right there. I pulled this comment where it showed reference to two separate situations. You can see the one about the beets, and I showed you an image of those said beets. And then they talked about three separate cases with the cans. And this is just one that I found live that I could show you. But if you go back and you look at my receipts where I kind of talk about how things connect to, each receipt connects to different elements of like Project 25 relevance, like regulatory bodies or different kind of things, you'll see some of the connections. So today was just supposed to be a light little touch, just saying, hey, I do more of a buffet structure on this page. I'm just so excited to be able to share some of the connections that I make with things, and I'm so glad that there are so many people who are interested in the content. Once again, I just show some of the connections. I will have a very specific live where I jump through receipt 1 through 7, which is technically phase 1 of what I've been working on, but since I already had a lot of that already in the shorts, I decided to leave that first, explain how does this show up in our life, and then we can kind of go walk back through phase 1 if you want to kind of a breakdown of each individual receipt and how it connects directly to Project 25. This is more like a sub category, if you will. That would be like main category. So once again, thank you so much for hopping in on this live. And as we kind of jump in, like I said, we looking at everything. We are everywhere looking at everything. And the beauty in social media is that we truly can almost have travel for free. We can connect with people and stories and situations that are far away from maybe where we physically or geographically are placed, but we can still learn from one another and connect with one another, because how else would we have known some of these things were happening with some of the food, to be able to look in and dive in a little bit more and say, hey, what is happening? Why is it happening? Who is allowing it to happen? Why are they allowing it to happen? So we'll continue to dive into these stories, because now that we can kind of see this is not just a one-off with the companies, this is more systemic. This is something that is very connected, and we're going to continue to map out those connections. I could dig in a little bit more, but I also know this is a later live, and I do want to kind of honor the fact that I said I would kind of be a little bit shorter and just kind of really touch on some of these connections. We'll dive in, and I'll have more receipts later that I'll lay out. So I'm going to look and see if there are any questions. Gonna pull out of this site and look and see. I don't see anything at the moment. So once again, thank you so much. As I said, I was trying to navigate just a quick walkthrough for this very first live. I appreciate you so much for coming in and being a part of my very first live here on the good old YouTube. And I just look forward to giving you guys amazing content more as we go forward, and showing you the receipts that I have, because what we are definitely collecting receipts, we are annotating, we are marinating, and we are giving ourselves a moment so that we can come back and have lively discussions. Thank you so much. You all have been great, and I'll see you in the next video. And if you're interested and you're like, no, I need a little bit more, don't you worry, you can see me even if I can't see you in the shorts or in the long form videos. You can kind of see a little bit more of some of the content that I've been working on. So if that's your pleasure, feel free to go shoot over to the shorts or the long form videos that are sitting on my page. I have about 20 videos to present date. And otherwise, I'll see you next time on the next live. It has been a pleasure. See you next time.